so workforce education grants. These became, oh, well, maybe. It's, my slides show froze up. Sorry about that. There we go. All right, background of our grants. These were something that the legislature established in 2013. They were designed to provide grants for career and technical education programs in secondary schools in South Dakota. The grants provide school districts and private nonprofit entities who provide specialized training the opportunity to make transformative change in their career and technical education programs. Now, I often get asked what private nonprofit entities means. It's not just South Dakota's public schools that can apply for these grants. It's also private schools, religious schools, job training programs across the state have applied for grants. So it is not delegated just to public schools. I will say that that is most of who applies and receives our awards. So the more you know, the maximum award amount established for the workforce education grant is $225,000 per award. Now, every year, the amount that we have to award changes based on the funding options, but any school is, or any entity is allowed to apply for up to $225,000. So any projects that you're thinking of brainstorming, if you're, we'll get to the matching funds in a minute, but if you're thinking ahead to the cost and something like that, that is what your maximum award amount will be. Now, these awards are handed out through a competitive submission and review process. The grant team is expected to make significant and meaningful improvements to an existing or new career and technical education program. These applications for these projects should not be one-off projects for small equipment improvement or trainings for teachers or staff or transportation for getting students from one place to another or smaller activities like that. We're talking big picture transformative change, that whole idea of large impact to your school and your community is what we're looking for. And these are one-time awards. So if an additional grant is available in the future from the fund, districts will not be re-rewarded funds to maintain the same project. So this is a one-time award. All right, the purpose of the grant and the eligibility of the grant. It's designed to support and align secondary school CTE systems with South Dakota's post-secondary education programs and workforce needs. It's meant to develop a pipeline for the state's workforce to improve economic growth and to serve middle and high school students. So the idea is, yes, this is going to provide a transformative program for your students, but those students will hopefully then take those skills and benefits that they got because of your school's grants and lead that into workforce development and improve the economic growth for the state. So the hope is that it's all connected. Eligible applicants are local education agencies with projects designed to serve middle and high school students. Those who are awarded will serve as a fiscal agent through the completion of the project. So applicants must demonstrate commitment by all grant partners and the grant project to sustain itself following the conclusion of the grant. So the award is intended to build a program, improve a program, start a program. It's a big picture project, and the award is intended to get that off the ground, but part of your application really needs to include how you're going to sustain that program once the grant funding runs out. So that's very important. All right, so keeping it simple, this is just how I feel, like kind of the bullet points of what you really need to remember when you're thinking of projects or ideas. The project must meet the following criteria: build, reform, or enhance. So you are going to have a new or existing approved secondary CTE programs. So the Division of Career and Technical Education will be approving or has already approved your CTE program, and your grant project is going to build, reform, or enhance that program. You're going to align your grant to a high skill, high demand, and high wage career or post-secondary program in South Dakota. So your project should be fitting a workforce need that's in high demand in the state. And then demonstrate. You're going to demonstrate your ability to complete the project. So it's important to have your application include a plan from start to finish. How, I mean, we all have great ideas, but often that timeline can get lost in that. And there is a start and finish date for the project and your application. Really important that you include that timeline for starting your project, progress along the way, and your ability for your agency to complete the project on time. All right, proposed projects. Now, they need to fall in with at least one of these categories, but often, and to your benefit, they can and should fall in into more of these categories. Evaluation for alignment to post-secondary education and workforce demands. So if your application can illustrate how the program that you're starting or improving is going to provide a pipeline into post-secondary educational opportunities or workforce demand opportunities for your students, then that's a huge win. Development of career pathways or programs of study. So we're looking at our CTE clusters, and each of those have pathways and programs of study, and maybe you want to enhance or add or improve one of those pathways or programs of study, and this grant is going to help develop that cluster and make it bigger and better, or add on to an already successful cluster that your school is working with. And then development of career guidance or work-based learning programs. So hopefully your workforce development grant project is going to help students with the whole idea of what do I want to do when I'm done here? And this is something new, and I didn't know this was a thing, and I didn't know that I could do this or be this. And this project has given me insight into new career opportunities and put me in a position where I can learn on the job or hands-on at school, things like that. So career guidance and that career development for your students is a huge plus when you're applying for one of these grants. So it can also include educator training. So if you're going to pay for a teacher to get specialized training to build that program or move a program forward, or you know, kind of bring it into the 21st century, that's acceptable. That's encouraged to use these funds for that. Are you going to improve facilities? Are you going to build? Are you going to add on any sort of facility improvement to ensure the space and the success of your workforce education grant? Are you going to be purchasing equipment or instructional materials to enhance or add on a program? All of these categories can and should, one or more of them can and should be included in your workforce education grant application. All right, grant match. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this because this is what I get asked the most questions about. And it often, even after grants are awarded, it often provides the most confusion for grant award winners. So I really would like people to understand what this means on the front side of applying for a workforce education grant. Now, this is a one-to-one grant opportunity, meaning the full amount requested from the grant must be matched on your end with an equal amount from non-state grant funds. So it can come from in-kind contributions from the education agency. It can come from a community contributor, or if you have a business or industry partner in your community that's looking to partner with you on a project on workforce development on creating some sort of employee pipeline for their business, and they deem your school as a great partner to foster that relationship, that's the type of partner we're talking about. So it can come from any or all of those funding sources, as long as every grant dollar that you're requesting is matched with it has a equal dollar amount match coming from one of those entities. So matching funds have to be the record keeping end of matching funds also is where we get a lot of questions once the grants are progressing. So I just wanted to highlight what kind of we mean by matching funds, but they need to be adequately documented. So if you're using people's time or a gift of time, you need to adequately document that. You need to provide necessary and reasonable project objectives for that budget. And then you need to make sure that those contributions have been established within the rules of federal grant accordance. So I always get asked, what do you mean by matching funds? Those categories that I showed you in the last slide are pretty generic, but I like to kind of dig in on this because this is such an important part of the grant, and I really feel it's important for people to understand what we mean by this, because it's going to be frustrating for you and it's going to be frustrating for us if there isn't a comprehensive understanding of what we mean by matching funds. So whether they come from in-kind contributions, meaning they don't have to be actual cash dollars, or the dollars, matching funds can come from a variety of sources, and your match doesn't have to come from just one source to fit the grant dollars you're requesting. So they might include a portion of a staff or administrator compensation that can be connected to the grant project, time that an industry professional donates to advising, mentoring, or coaching for the project, or equipment donated by a business or community organization. So if you have a business or industry person coming in and helping you with a welding class, just as an example, that company would put value on that person's time. It would indicate a value for that, and that value would be documented, and then you could use that as matching funds for your grant. So if you have a teacher who is specifically working on a specific class that was created because of this grant, your school can designate with time forms and all the proper documentation that that time is specific to this grant. And although that teacher would be paid anyways, if it's being, if their compensation is a direct result of this grant project, you can use time and effort logs and use those as matching funds. So it's something, it's kind of overwhelming to think about, but if you're struggling to find where your matching funds would come from, it's important to remember that we're not just talking about a monetary gift from a partner or a business or industry. Those are great, but there are other ways to accumulate those matching funds that you need to make your grant viable. So, and then also monetary contributions may come from donations, grants acquired during the Workforce Education Grant award period, or investments made by the school district. So if the school is going to buy, say, just as an example, a piece of land that's specific for you to build a new facility on, or things like that, and that's coming from district funds, we just need documentation of that. There's so many different ways that you can accumulate those matching funds, and I would say by far, as we're going through the grant process and when grant applications open, this issue is what I get the most questions about. So, all right. Can matching funds come from more than one source? I haven't gotten this question, but I'm getting ahead of it because I always get this question as soon as those grant applications open, within a week, I have a dozen emails or phone calls from people saying, can we get a donation and use some land that the school was going to buy? Yes, yes, yes. I just need to reiterate that over and over again. I would say that the biggest roadblock to schools not applying for this grant is they just don't have a great concept of where they could accumulate those matching funds from. So whether it's in kind or monetary, it may come from multiple sources, but the source must be necessary and reasonable for accomplishment of the project objectives. It must be provided for in the budget. So when you're applying for your grant, your budget that you're requesting funds for has to have a matching budget. Off the bat, you have to be thinking these things out in advance and provide that in the budget you're proposing. And the values for the contributions of services and property must be established as they would for federal grants in accordance to the law. So keep that in mind when you're doing some thinking about grant projects. All right, what documents do we need to provide if we're including compensation? This is another big question I get. It's often the hardest for business managers, grant projects folks to kind of wrap their brains around to make sure that they have everything that they need. But staff compensation is an eligible match source when the staff is necessary and reasonable for accomplishment of the project's objectives. This is where I was talking about the time and effort logs. They need to be kept throughout the grant period, and they need to accurately track the percentage of the time that that staff person devoted specifically to the grant project. So the total time invested over the life of the project must be documented. And of course, that time and effort log has to take place between the beginning and end date of the grant. That's all that you would be reimbursed for. All right. So approximate timeline for the grants, probably late fall, early winter. These dates will become more concrete, but this is, if you want to think ahead, if you're thinking about projects, if you're sitting down with a group of folks at your district and you want to brainstorm some grant project ideas, this is kind of the timeline we're looking for. I would suggest not waiting until early February to have that conversation. I would suggest having that conversation soon and finding the person in your school who's comfortable with grant writing and maybe has a good grasp of budgets and things like that. Maybe connecting with the business manager. If you don't have a good grasp of budgets, it's often the business manager that I work with to get reimbursements processed. So it's really great to bring them into the conversation. I have half a dozen business managers right now that are handed a pile of paperwork with the grant and said, here, we need our money back for this. And so I would suggest on the front end of your brainstorming to bring the business manager or whoever would be in charge of collecting those reimbursements from the state into the conversation, because it's going to be so much easier for them and me to have those conversations that we need to have at the tail end to get your projects reimbursed. So I would have those conversations probably this fall, and then early winter we'll have a set date in February that the grant will open for applications. It'll be late March. It's usually middle of February, late March, so 6-7 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks that we have from the time the grant applications open until they're due. The grant applications would be emailed to our office. It'd be emailed to me. You don't need to put anything in the mail anymore, so that's convenient. And then by mid-April, we'll announce the grant award winners. Now, people often wonder how those get chosen. Nobody from our office chooses these grant awards. We put together a group of post-secondary folks, business and industry folks. I try to get people from all across the state, from different business and industries, or economic development people. I try to put together, depending on the number of grant applications that we have, I try to put together at least a group of a half a dozen people. And then I also try to, if we have applications for nonprofit entities, I try to put together a separate grant review group for those. And I try to find people that are very specific to nonprofit work and understand how that works. So those people have been fantastic. They have a rubric. There's a link here I'll show you shortly where you'll find everything that you're going to be essentially graded on when you submit a grant application. And our review folks use that rubric to review and score your grant. It's a really fair and diverse group of people every year, and I've always been impressed. And very often I have people who volunteer to do it year after year, and I just honestly don't need that many people because it kind of muddies the waters, but it's just a fantastic group of people and they enjoy doing it, and that's why they come back year after year and ask me when we're going to review these grants again. So it's not our office, it's a group of leaders throughout the state that pick the award winners. So those will be announced about mid-April. And then from mid-April until mid-May or so, I will work on your contract. So everything that you've put in the grant application will be transported into a contract form. I might connect with you to clarify a few things. Or if there's a few things in the grant application where the review committee thought this is a fantastic idea, but I need some clarification on this or this, I will work with you or your school to get clarification on those things, and we will include all of that clarification and your budget into a grant contract. So by the end of May, you'll have signed a contract with our office, and then on June 1st or so, the grant projects can begin. So if you're opening a new facility, or if you're breaking ground on a new facility, any grant project can happen as of June 1st. That being said, you cannot start a project before the grant contract states that you can. So if you buy a piece of equipment, say you were awarded the grant and you found a good deal on a piece of equipment on May 15th, if our office gets an invoice for May 15th and your grant contract isn't until June 1st, the state would not be able to reimburse you for that. So I like to tell people when you're working with your folks with matching funds, donations, things like that, just make sure that they're aware that any of those transactions that need to be documented for reimbursement have to happen within the 18-month grant period. So that's really important. So, and then the rest of these dates, progress reports. Every quarter, our office requires a progress report just so we can kind of keep track and make sure your grant is moving forward. Do any troubleshooting with you. Maybe it happens, maybe an in-kind or a matching contributor fell through. You know, things like that happen. And so if we have these progress reports and we can work through those things with you, it's less frustrating for you for sure, and it's less frustrating for us if we just work together. So we require progress reports every quarter. We would prefer a reimbursement request every quarter too. As your grant project is going on, it's better not to wait till the end and try to get all of that reimbursed at once, because often there's glitches in the paperwork. We have to work with business managers to figure out, you know, what this meant, what this invoice was for. Often we have wonderfully organized reimbursement requests and there's no questions and they go right through to the finance office really easily, but that's not always the case. So if we have those progress reports with the reimbursement request quarterly, that's my suggestion, is every quarter submit a progress report and your reimbursement request. A progress report is required with every reimbursement request anyways, so it's always my suggestion to just submit those together so we can work through any issues. So every quarter you'll submit a progress report and hopefully a reimbursement request. And then for the next round of grants, your grant finalization date will be November 1st of 2022. So from grant start to finish, you'll have 18 months to complete that project. All right. Reimbursement requests. This is another thing. I would say after matching funds, this is where I get the most concern and confusion from people. So this is non-negotiable. These are kind of the rules of reimbursement. So at least one reimbursement with corresponding required supporting documents should be submitted each quarter to cover any expenditures that you incurred during that quarter related to the grant. They must be accompanied by the most recent progress report. They're subject to adequate progress on the project goals. So if you're submitting a reimbursement request, but your progress report indicates that nothing has happened, we're going to question that. So make sure that those two things kind of coincide with each other. The documentation must be available to support all expenditures, and expenditures must be approved before the end of the grant period. So we will process a reimbursement request after the grant period is ended, but those expenditures have to at least be approved by our office before that November 1st date. Local education agencies are required to utilize their financial accounting system to track financial expenditures. And I'll have an example of that here for you. So this is also a sample of a progress report. This is just something a couple of years ago, a grant award person had asked me, what are you really looking for in that progress report? So I just did a form for them so that they could keep track. So there's progress report 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on here. And then I gave them the dates that they're due. And so they just printed this off and stuck it on their office wall. And they pulled up a copy of it and filled it in for me. It's really not that demanding. It's just, where are you at in the project? Maybe if there's been some changes, snap a couple pictures and attach it to the email to me, and send it along with your reimbursement requests, and we'll get all that paperwork through a lot quicker. So you can use this form, and you can use your own. Sometimes we'll just get a cover sheet from the school saying, here's where we're at in our grant project, and here's what things look like. And that's fine as well. This is just something I came up with to help somebody who had asked, and a few grant award winners have used this for their progress report. All right, reimbursement requests. So grant funds being requested and matching funds. So when you submit a reimbursement request, you're going to be asking for both of these. These are two separate columns on your accounting. And so what I like to tell everybody is just save everything. So if you're submitting a reimbursement request because you want money back, I need the same documentation for the money you're being reimbursed as I do for the money that you're proving as a match. So for the grant funds being requested, those obviously all have to be adequately documented. They have to be provided for the approved budget. So if you have a budget category for equipment, say mini grants, often the only budget category is for equipment. Say you won $150,000 for equipment, and then you submit a reimbursement request for salaries or travel. Obviously, we're not going to be able to approve that. So you need to make sure that the grant funds you're requesting fit the budget categories. That being said, if your grant changes throughout the life of the grant, our office can help you with an amendment to work with those budget categories so that you aren't hung out to dry. We'll still make sure that we help you. Say you had after the grant started, you had this surprise donation of equipment. And so you wanted to move some of those funds to salaries and benefits because you wanted to reimburse a new teacher that was helping with the grant or something like that. We can adjust those budget categories through the amendment process. So we do make it really easy to deal with any hiccups that might come along. Our job here is to work with you. We want to see the project succeed. So grant funds being requested may not be used for salaries, benefits, costs associated with writing the grant proposal, or applications made before the grant award date. So I have had this question before: can our grant monies pay for the person who wrote the grant? No, they cannot. So all of that is happening before the grant award date, and we cannot reimburse you for anything outside of those contracted dates. So grant funds will be reimbursed on any one-to-one request and will not be greater than the matching funds verified. So if you submit a reimbursement request for $20,000, but you only provided documentation for matching funds up to $15,000, we will only reimburse you up to that $15,000. So it's really important to make sure your matching funds match your request. So with those matching funds, They need to be just as adequately documented as your grant funds being requested. They also need to be provided for in the approved budget. Those can also be adjusted with an amendment with our office if need be, and they must be necessary and reasonable for the accomplishment of the project objective. So here's a sample reimbursement request. This is something that I share with everybody on the front end of the grant awards, along with that progress report template. I will give you an open Excel file with your grant categories, the dollars approved, and you can kind of use that as a guide when you're submitting your reimbursement request. Some people use this, some don't. Either way, whatever you submit to me gets plugged into something similar to this, and then I pass that on to the finance office. So this is just a sample reimbursement request. We would work with you to make sure that all of your documentation fits into those categories. So, and your budget categories will differ as well, depending on your grant. So this is just an example. All right, so tips, some really helpful tips that are going to make the whole grant progress easier for you. So I mentioned this before, but you're going to submit the same supporting documentation for matching funds as you would for grant funds being requested. It's really nice if you indicate on invoices and supporting documents what that's for. Like this invoice from this lumber company, put match on the top, and this invoice from the business office for your teacher's salary, put grant on the top, or reimbursement on the top. It's really nice for the finance people that they'll bother you less and have less questions for you if everything's really clear. So label those supporting documents with matching numbers that fit your budget categories or your expenditure categories. That's helpful, things like that. And ensure each expenditure is in an appropriate budget category. Like I mentioned before, if you're seeking reimbursement for something that doesn't fit one of your budget categories, we're going to have questions. And then ensure that each invoice being submitted is dated within the contract start and end date. So that's the first thing I'm going to look at, is this date on this invoice or statement within the grant date. And if it's not, it's not going to be included. So I did include a payment guidance sheet. I will provide this to anybody who gets a grant as well, that kind of reiterates these tips and helps like guide you through the reimbursement process. So I often get asked how the reimbursement process works and how long do we have to wait for our money, things like that. Some schools, they wait till the end of the grant. They want, to do everything at once, and especially if it's a one-time reimbursement and a one-time invoice, things like that. And that happens, but often these grant projects are important to the district, but so is the accounting of where the money is coming from. So I like to explain to people exactly what the process is for reimbursement. So after you submit a request, our office organizes the accounting, the Excel file, make sure everything fits into the budget categories. I'll ensure there's a progress report and supporting documentation. I will combine that all into a PDF file. And then I will submit that to our Department of Education Finance office. And then that office will either return the request to me and the school for corrections or clarifications, or if it's all correct, which is always the hope, it'll go through a lot quicker. But a complete and correct reimbursement request takes about 2 to 3 weeks to complete the entire process with the finance office, and then about another 7 to 10 days for you to see a financial transaction. And that financial transaction will come to you in whichever way your school has that set up, whether it's a check, physical check in the mail, or an automatic deposit, depending on how your school has that already set up. So, and then my office, someone in our office, usually me, and then maybe even your regional specialist, if they're keeping track of your grant, but we'll monitor the contract system to ensure that your reimbursements are being made in a timely manner. So if I sent off a reimbursement request a month ago, you might not have told me that you got that reimbursement, but I'm going to have a note to check and make sure that you did, so I can look into what the holdup is if you have it. All right. Okay, so that was a lot. I know. It was a lot, and it's overwhelming. And all I can tell you is that if you're thinking about submitting a grant, our office The link here to the website that I included, this is in the resources that Brianna has shared, but you can just Google it too. It has the list of all the grant awards that have been made over the years and what their projects were. If you need ideas, if you just want to see what other people have done, what other people have been approved for. That's often the biggest roadblock to people getting started, is to just coming up with a great idea. You know there's a need to fill, but you just don't know where to get started. So I would suggest that. And there's also a lot of we have a specific manual for public school grant applications, and then one for nonprofit entities too, a guidance document that's way longer than my presentation, but if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty and dig into what's going to be required. And then the rubrics are included in there too, so you can see what the grant review committee would be scoring you on. So those are really helpful. But what questions do you have about this grant that I did not cover in our 40 minutes here? There is no stupid question. I have often been asked questions about these grants that I can't answer. I have to refer back to a legislative rule or call my boss and get some clarification. That happens. So there really isn't any silly questions. If you do have a question that you just don't want to ask in front of the group or put in the chat box, my next slide will be contact information, but most of you know how to get a hold of me. And I'm happy to chat with you about any ideas you have or questions you may have. So contact information for our office, often your regional specialist is going to be your best first contact when discussing workforce education grant projects or ideas, because they're familiar with your school and your community. So these are the email and phone numbers for all of the regional specialists in our office, as well as my information as grants manager up there. And then our assistant director, Amy Miller, we have the added benefit of her when she was an administrator at Webster applying for and receiving one of our grants. So she has a lot of experience with the whole process. So she's a really great resource too. So feel free to contact any of your regional specialists or me directly if you just want to have a conversation about what would possibly be a good idea. You might even need that regional specialist to go through your approved programs with you. You might not be aware of some of the approved programs in your school, depending on your role at the school, and say, hey, what approved programs do we have, and where can we approve, and what of these programs really could use, kind of a swift kick in the butt, so to speak, to get where they need to be. And maybe one of these programs would be a good fit for a workforce education grant application, or that regional specialist, because they're familiar with the workforce needs in your region, might be able to help you come up with a new program to start. That would be a good idea for a workforce education grant. So